Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our second annual Central Park Challenge event. My name is Ismael Nunez. I'm a YI Self Advocate, and I'm also a reporter for the YI Self Advocate newsletter. As part of our annual Central Park Challenge event and fundraiser, we are hosting a series of events to increase awareness of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities in our community. Excuse me. People with disabilities like myself, we need to speak up for ourselves. But then again, we all need to speak up because we want our voices heard. And most importantly, when elected officials sign something, we want to be there when they sign it, and we want to see what they're signing. And we like to be there with them side to side. This is the joy about being a self-advocate. Not only do I get to represent myself and the entire community, but we get to educate the entire community. We do that through our presentations all the time. Today, we have the honor of talking with a fellow disability advocate awareness from upstate New York. We're being joined right now by New York State Assemblyman Thomas Abinanti. He's the chair of Committee on People with Disabilities. Assemblyman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to join you. I think this is what you're doing is fabulous. It is so important that we send a message to the community that there's a sub-community here that is really an important part of our everyday lives. And we should not be ignoring people with disabilities. We should not be casting them aside. They are people like everyone else. They come from all parts of our community. They have abilities that can contribute to our community. They just need to be given the opportunity to participate.
Mr. Benanti, before I continue, did I say your name right? Your last name?
Yes, you did. You got it right.
Thank you. Just want to double check.
Abinanti, you got it right. There you go.
So here's a couple of quick questions. Here in New York State is working on people with autism and other intellectual and developmental disabilities. Is that true?
Yes, yes. I was just named the chair of a brand new committee called People with Disabilities. The Senator leader and the Senate leader and the Speaker of the Assembly both got together and decided that it was time to set up a committee, the sole purpose of which is to concentrate on people with disabilities. And so I'm pleased to be the first chair of it in the Assembly. Senator Mannion is the chair in the Senate, and he and I have been talking. We've been trying to set a mutual agenda. But I think the most important priority is to raise awareness of people with disabilities in our community. Excuse me. As I said, this is a spectrum of people. And some people have high needs, but it doesn't mean they don't have some abilities that they can contribute to our community. And some people have lesser needs and can contribute more to our community. But every part of the disability community can be involved in our everyday activities and can make a contribution to that. And I think people don't recognize that. They often say, well, that person's got a disability, so let them go off in the corner somewhere. And no, people with disabilities are everywhere. We all have some kind of a disability, okay? Every one of us. I'm 5'3", so I'm height challenged, right? And that's in some cases a disability. And some people who are 6'7", they have to duck when they're walking in a doorway. That could be a disability. People have speech disabilities. People have intellectual disabilities. Some people are in wheelchairs. So we all have some kind of challenge that we have to meet. For some people, the challenge is greater. And so therefore the community should help a little bit more. I don't expect we're going to make the doorways higher for somebody who's too tall, or make all the shelves lower for somebody who's shorter. Okay. But on the other hand, if you're in a wheelchair, well, then we should be making buildings accessible. If you have a sight disability, well, then we should be using larger type, or we should be using more verbal, oral access. If you have an intellectual disability, well, then we need to provide you with some assistance so that you can reach the height of your abilities. And you know, I think everyone can contribute, and we're a better place when everyone is contributing and is part of the community.
So let me ask you, what are your legislative priorities this year to support people, not just with autism, but with people with disabilities?
Well, yes, first of all, we did have a budget. And unfortunately, the executive branch seems to want to cut and cut and cut. And they've really cut down. We're now cutting to the bone. The monies that were available for OPWDD, for example, have been static over the last 10 years. The governor has shifted everybody into Medicaid, which means that if you want services from OPWDD, you have to be povertized. You've got to basically be in poverty. You've got to live at the Medicaid level. Otherwise, you lose services from OPWDD. And that's one of the things that I would really like to change. There's got to be another way to get services from OPWDD without having to be in the Medicaid system. Second, so I pushed back on that in the budget. We were not successful in getting that changed, but we were successful in preventing the governor from cutting the monies available to OPWDD. The disappointment is we couldn't increase them significantly because we have a lot more people now who need services. Take autism, for example. The numbers are dramatic. I saw a number somewhere that said in this 10-year cycle, there will be 500,000 people who have autism who will reach the age of 21 during this decade. Now, that's a lot of people in this country, and a large number of them will be in New York. And we're not prepared to assimilate them into our community. We're just not prepared. The unemployment rate is very, very high for people with intellectual disabilities. It's high for people with physical disabilities. So we're just not paying attention that we have this part of our community that wants to actively participate and should be able to participate. And we're just not doing that. So in the budget, we pushed back really hard. We were able to prevent cuts, but we were unfortunately not able to move forward with new monies. Now, there is a big pot of money out there from the federal government, about $1 billion sitting in a lockbox, and we have to continue to push to see if we can get the governor to spend that money where it should be spent. That money comes from the federal government. It was accumulated because of services that were rendered by our agencies, the agencies certified by OPWDD. So those monies rightfully should be spent in the OPWDD area. And we're going to keep pushing to make sure that they are spent in that area. We did get a cost of living, a very small cost of living increase in the budget, but we did get a little bit of money to so that our voluntary agencies who help people with disabilities could give their workers a cost of living increase. There was money put in the budget to make sure that all of the people who work for the agencies are up to the minimum wage. I mean, that tells you how little we care. I mean, that we have people at minimum wage working to help people with, that's a very important job, you know, and there need to be some skills. And so we need to make sure that we raise the level of pay for people who work with those who have intellectual disabilities. And we also need to have training for them. We have tried in the past. I passed a bill several years ago that the governor vetoed that would set up a training program and a series of steps within the OPWDD system so that somebody who comes in at the entry level can look forward to having a career, not just a simple job, but have a career where you can move up and move up and move up and get paid more and contribute more. We still have to do that type of thing. We have not been successful. I know Aileen Gunther, who's the chair of the Mental Health Committee, is working on the same issue. And I know she had a bill that the governor vetoed. We're going to keep pushing. Those are the types of things that we need to do. Plus, we need to find a way to get people trained for jobs, for today's jobs. And we need to get those jobs available. We need to, get the employers to understand that, look, you've got this workforce here at a time where you can't find workers. Well, there's a lot of people out there who want to work. Don't look the other way. Look to them. find out what their skills are, and I'm sure that you can fit them into your operation, whether they have the ability to do very simple things, maybe organizing or making boxes or hanging up clothes in a clothing store, or whether they have computer skills. I mean, we had a person who won the science fair and was having difficulty getting an entree to a business. Once he got that entree, they recognized. They said, "This young man who's got Asperger's is brilliant," and he's now working in their IT department. It's just we've got to get people to understand that there's this huge number of people with skills who want to have a good quality of life and should be given that opportunity to show what they can do.
So that leads to the next question. There are many professionals out there. We have the paramedics, the NYPD, the fire department, the educational system, teachers, counselors, principals. Do they need to be properly trained, or are they trained properly?
In my opinion, I think that's a very important question. This is part of attuning our community to the people who have intellectual disabilities. It's not just the employers that have to be trained to recognize the characteristics of a person with a disability. It's the first responders as well. Whether it's a fire department coming to a fire in the house, whether it's a paramedic who's coming to help, or whether it's a police officer who's called on a 911 call. We've seen too often where police officers misunderstood the characteristics of a person with, let's say, autism, and believed that was a dangerous person, when in fact what you needed was a little bit of understanding of that person and how to deal with that person to defuse the situation. So I believe that we need to train our first responders in 3 steps. Number one is to recognize the situation, to understand what's happening, identify the person you're dealing with and say, okay, what's going on here? Does this person have a mental problem? Does this person have an intellectual disability? Are they excited because they're on drugs? What's the it's hard to distinguish, but you're the first responder. You got to learn to see the different characteristics, distinguish them. And then number 2, you got to figure out the appropriate response. A gun is not the appropriate response. A stun gun is not the appropriate response. Handcuffs are not the appropriate response. You really need to be a bit of a social worker or a psychoanalyst to understand the situation and figure out how do you diffuse the situation? How do you de-escalate it? When you are called because there's a person having is in an excited moment, well, they didn't call you to bring your gun. They called you to help that person. And so shooting that person is not helping that person. And so we've got to train the police officer, 1, to recognize it, 2, in de-escalation tactics, and then number 3, to call for backup and call for the appropriate backup. How do you get a crisis team there? How do you get the right people? And how do you get that person out of this situation? If you can't get them calmed down, how do you get them to the right location? How do you get them into some kind of a residential facility, even if it's just for a couple of hours, where some people can calm them down, find out what the problem is, why is there a crisis, and help them. Now, fortunately, the governor did require all police departments to self-examine. This was motivated by and large by the Black Lives Matter movement. We're seeing police officers all across the country making mistakes and using their guns, using their weapons, often killing people who are not criminals, who just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe have an intellectual problem or a mental health issue at the moment, or whatever. And so the governor said, it's time for you guys to self-examine and to come back with plans. Now, all of the police departments that I have been involved with in my district have taken to heart the issue of people who have a mental issue at the moment, whatever that is, okay? Whether it's a mental health issue, whether they're on drugs, or whether they have an intellectual disability and can't respond to the call. I mean, if you're talking about a person with autism, for example, even what we might call a high functioning person might have a difficulty in communication at that moment, under tension. and they see somebody coming at them, a police officer, they themselves very easily can misread what's going on. And if you have a person who is a little bit more severely autistic, they might become afraid. They might run. If a police officer says, lie down in the street, well, they've been taught all these years, no, you don't lie down in the street. That's not what you do. They learn behavioral patterns. And now you've got a police officer telling them to do something which runs contrary to their learned behavioral pattern. They're not going to respond. Well, the answer to that is not to shoot them. The answer to that is to understand why they're not responding. And so, yes, there's a lot of training that has to be done here. And I know a lot of the police chiefs are taking this seriously. And they recognize that they need to do something. The problem is training is very expensive. And it also requires taking police officers off the street for the training. So if you have a small police department, and most of our departments in the state of New York are small departments. You have villages that have 20, 22 officers. Now, if you're taking one of them at a time off the street to take a course, now you've got to fill that spot, which means somebody else is doing overtime. And so that gets very expensive. So we've got to deal with that. Plus, we don't have the backup available. We don't have the crisis teams available. We keep talking about it, but like even my own county of Westchester, I mean, they do have some crisis teams. They say they cover the county. They don't cover the county. They don't have enough support. They don't have enough money. They don't have the professionals organized. The professionals are there. I mean, we have schools all over the county of Westchester. We have schools like Children's Village, and we have Cedar Knolls. We have special act schools. We have 4410 schools. We have 4201 schools, and then we have teachers who are from all of our regular high schools who are many of whom are running special needs programs for kids, and they're trained. I mean, it's amazing to see some of these teachers. They are trained on how to de-escalate a situation. And if necessary, take some big burly kid with autism and bring him to the ground without hurting him. They have the techniques to do that. So if they all can do that, why can't they cooperate with our police departments and be the response team and come in and help in a situation? I'm not saying don't have the police arrive, but have the expertise there, so that we treat people with the respect that they deserve to get. It's so that's kind of my agenda this year, to make this, to try to get this change in attitude, and to bring together groups of people, like talking to you today, and you're putting this out on the internet is so important, because we want to get this message out there that we've got to bring the entire community together. We responded very well when we heard that there was this crisis, the pandemic's impact on our nursing homes. And it is focused like a laser, some of the deficiencies in our nursing homes and how badly we're treating our senior citizens. Well, we have a similar problem in our group homes, where they're short-staffed. We had the pandemic hit them hard, but it's not getting the same attention. So I'm trying to focus the rest of the community on the needs of people with disabilities and to accent their abilities and say, let's all work together. We can get a better community when we're all part of that community.
So then at least the next question, you just mentioned what we're doing right now. Now, let's say I come with a bunch of other self-advocates and we want to talk to you about some changes. How do we get to make you hear us? Do we take over the streets? Do we take over?
I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope it doesn't come to that.
I'm just saying that, Mr. Abinanti.
No, but I understand. I've gotten so frustrated sometimes that I've suggested that we should have a car caravan to Albany. Because of the pandemic, we don't want people out on the street. But I would love to see a car caravan stretching from Albany down to Kingston, and bring everybody out to get attention. We can't seem to attract the attention because we play by the rules. Okay. Mm-hmm. The people with disabilities, their families, their supporters are all very busy. Okay. It is intense to meet the needs of people with disabilities. Okay. Not all can drive. Okay. and many of them cannot. Many of them are. Look, I have a son who's 21 years old. Okay, he's finishing up in high school. He's not going to be able to drive. He can't drive, and he's partially verbal. Okay, he's not going to be conversant. He's not going to have a conversation with you. Now, I can bring him to Albany, okay, but that's taking my time to bring him to Albany. It's not like he can get on a bus by himself and go there. Now, the self-advocates can, but it's important that you bring others along with you so that you can show the spectrum of people here and say, we need to have help in each of these areas. And so, but we're playing by the rules. So the newspapers ignore us. The newspapers, we rarely get a story. When do we get a story? We get a story when there's a person in a group home who's been assaulted by one of the workers. Well, okay, that focuses some attention, but it's a short-lived attention, and it never seems to bring any improvements. The governor set up a little police agency called the Justice Center. Well, that really hasn't improved anything. He's consolidated all of the review so that there's now an agency to investigate. But I'm not as interested. Well, I'm interested in making sure the investigations go and the people get punished where they commit a crime. But I want to prevent that situation. Why is that happening? Well, it's happening because we're short-staffed. Right now, there are 54,000 workers in the voluntary agencies who deal with people with disabilities. There are 9,000 vacancies. 9,000 vacancies. So we're short-staffed by 9,000 people. That's a lot. And that puts a lot of pressure on those who are doing this work. And why? Because they're not paying enough. Back to where we started. The pay is way too low. If you can get paid more for working at McDonald's or working somewhere else, excuse me, why would you take on the difficult task of having to be someone's companion in a group home? There are a lot of people who do it because they're dedicated. They're certainly not doing it for the money. And they have their own families to take care of. And so they're working at 2 jobs. And it's very stressful. So there's a lot that's got to be changed. We've got to bring attention to this. But if the self-advocates could, in an organized fashion, talk to each of their own assembly members and senators, and to their Congress members as well, that would go a long way. Just to explain to them, hey, look, there's a problem here. We really need your help. And now, how do you do this? Well, in the non-pandemic times, excuse me, I'm getting all choked up here. You would make an appointment at the assembly member's office, and you would go in and talk to them. It's a little more difficult now. You have to contact the office and set up a Zoom. The disadvantage of that is it's a lot more work than just showing up at somebody's office and explaining first face to face. The advantage of it is you can bring more than one person on the Zoom. Now you and several other advocates can reach several assembly members. Figure out who your assembly member is and bring a couple of the other advocates with you. Get on Zoom, explain the situation, and then you go with them to their assembly member's office.
So let me ask you, Mr. Abinanti, forgive me interrupting you. You mentioned these changes and this radicalism change, which is very encouraging, by the way. Right now, there's a movement now to erase the R word. The word is retard. I'm sure I've been.
Oh, yes. The ARC used to be the Association for Retarded Children. And they were one of the first to recognize that that's not the way we should be referring to people.
Should that word be banned, ever be used in anything, whether it's in
music? I'm not into the cancel culture. But on the other hand, I think it's a word that should not be used. You have fire retardant fabrics. In that sense, that word can be used. Okay. You have other situations where the word is appropriate. It's not appropriate to refer to a person. Okay. And I think that I'm a practicing lawyer. And several years ago, I walked into the surrogates court and I was waiting online to be called up to the counter. And there was a brochure, and I picked up the brochure, and it said, if you know somebody who's retarded, and I looked at this and I said, what? This is ridiculous. And I went to the clerk and I said, why do you have this here? She said, that's the statute. That's what it says in the statute. I immediately drafted a bill and had that word removed. And we used instead intellectual disability. This was in the excuse me. This was in the context of guardianship.
Mm-hmm.
And, so we struggled over how to reframe this. And then after my bill, there was this whole series of bills coming down, and there's still more right now because we're more and more we're discovering where this word pops up in more statutes. And so little by little, we are removing it from the statute. And I think that is to change that word is a symbol of what needs to be done in the society. Words have meaning. Words have significance. And when we change the language that we use to speak about somebody who has a challenge, that's important. And I think we could use, I have a T-shirt that says, erase the R word. And then there's this people first approach, which is so important. People first means it's not a disabled person. It's a person with a disability. They are a person. Okay. Like I said, I'm a person who's height challenged. Some of our basketball players are also height challenged. They're way too tall. Now that I'm not trying to minimize, but that makes the point, right? We don't say, we don't say the person's too small. We just say it's a person. Okay. Who is this tall or this tall? Okay. So we should carry that over. It's a person with a challenge. It's a person with a special need. It's a person with a disability. See, I don't even like using the word disability, although some advocates want to use that word because that's the way the ADA is drafted. I would prefer to say a person with special needs because that's a person who, with a little bit of help, is going to lead the same life as the rest of us.
Mr. Abinanti, one last final question, which you've been great, by the way, in answering all your questions. They're very accurate and very clear. I thank you for that. We already know we have a friend upstate New York.
I think you have a lot of them in the Assembly and the Senate. I think the problem is they need to be educated as well. They don't know what they can do. And that's been the problem. We haven't been able, and I'm struggling with that too. As the new chairman, there's no agenda there, okay? The previous chair was the chair of the Mental Health Committee, and that was both mental health and people with disabilities. That's a major, major challenge. I mean, we've got very significant mental health issues right now. So when the two committees were split, it's allowing her to work in that area and confront what is a real significant problem today. And by the way, it's a problem for people with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities as well. They have comorbid conditions because having let's say having autism today, in a world where you can't touch other people, where you can't have the social interaction that you need and you're stuck on a computer, that brings mental issues along with and enhances the problems that you face because of autism. So, so when we split the two, so now I'm trying to develop the agenda. And I look to people like you to help me set that agenda. What is it that we should be concentrating? I gave you, my general agenda, but I need to hear from you. What can the state do? How do we, I identify transition as number one. And that means once you're 21, you lose all those supports that you had in school. You had a whole support system set up. Now all of a sudden you're on your own, and you've got to apply for OPWDD services. You've got to figure out how you're going to get services out there. You got to be assessed, and now you got to find a place to live. You've got to get all these backup services. And then if you want to work, how do you get a job? How do it is a monumental task. So we're dealing with that, but I need to hear from people like you as to what you see as the agenda, and then a little bit of help as to how we work our way through this, because we're in this together. And all the problems can't be solved by laws.
True. Now, one final question. On June 5th, every year of this year, we have the centralparkchallenge.org. There are going to be over 10,000 people there, walking, running, people with wheelchairs, having fun. And you're invited there to speak.
Well, I was going to say to you, this year it's going to be 10,001 because I'm going to join you.
Well, if you were invited there to speak that day, what words of encouragement would you like to tell everybody there with a disability?
Don't get discouraged. Have hope. And let's work together to make life better for our entire community.
Mr. Abinanti, I thank you very much. We now know we have a friend. We will definitely keep in contact. Thank you very much.
And I look forward to seeing, is that in person or that's in person, right?
It's, yes, the Central Park Challenge this year will be virtual, but we hope next year it will be live. And we hope to see you there and many other elected officials there. Like you said, we need to hear from them, and they will definitely hear from us. Like you said, that's important. Dialogues like this are very important and that are needed from both sides. It's important. And I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank the State Assembly and you, Mr. Abinanti, for this. But I also want to encourage our viewers that on June 5th, just you go to the website, centralparkchallenge.org. The entire show will be hosted by self-advocates like myself, but you will also hear from the services that YI has to offer. So please be there. You will also see the interview that we've just done with Mr. Abinanti. You will hear from him. But most importantly, people, you will get to see Broadway performers who are also, like Mr. Abinanti, are advocates for people with disabilities. And you will get to see our own Rep White and Blue, Cheer New York. So I hope to see you all on June 5th. And just go to our website, centralparkchallenge.org. Mr. Abinanti.
I want to thank you for giving me the chance to speak with you today. It was a pleasure and a privilege. And I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. And the pleasure was mine. And this is a great honor. Thank you all very much. God bless all of you. Take care.